Thank you, and it's an honor to be here. It's always nice to come home. That's my alma mater as well, so I enjoy it every time. What I'm presenting today is a bit different from what usually my work is. I'm very interested in the role of philanthropy and civil society in the context of crisis, often seen in a historical perspective. And by doing some background research for one of these other projects, I stumbled upon some literature that surprised me and seemed to me at odd or counterintuitive to what I was expecting. I must also say my presentation was just cut short by the first presenter because we cover a lot of the same material. But what I found out and what surprised me in this literature was this assumption that after 9/11, Muslim Americans donated less to charities. I found, and that is something also Sharik in an article discussed, that was a common narrative, a master narrative that was very widespread at the time. And to me sounded a little bit strange because I was coming to it from a civil society, social capital perspective, and I was intuitively expecting something different. So as a background, and that is something we have heard referring earlier, right after 9/11, this war on terrorism was broadened to a war on terrorism financing. After the executive order in which President Bush made this statement, Muslim charities or charities in general were seen as a potential component of a broad network of financial resources to support terrorist organizations. Whether those charities were willingly supporting these organizations or whether those charities were misused and funds were directed to other types of activities. Several in December 2001, the Holy Land Foundation was indicted, one of the largest Muslim American foundations, and in the following years, other charities and individuals linked to Muslim American charities were put under the spotlight. So this is the context, the background in which this narrative emerges, where the idea was that Muslim Americans were fearing to donate to charities because that money could have been misused or because of the risk to be put under the spotlight. There was some scholars or authors commented on shifting practices in international charities. So rather than donating money internationally, you donate in kind. That there was a shift from giving international to giving locally. And all this was the backbone of this master narrative. I should add here that all this literature, and you might guess it by seeing the references here, are not necessarily scholarly publications. They were often published in the Chronicle of Philanthropy or other trade publications. It was very anecdotal. At the same time, however, there was also, and that is something we heard also earlier this morning, and also something you hinted previously, there seemed to be some evidence that Muslim Americans were more engaged than before. That there is a new centrality of a Muslim identity, of an Islamic identity, if you want. And that was something I was more expecting. And so that was my starting point, and it caused me to drop for a moment the other project I was working on and trying to figure out what was going on and trying to find out a little bit more. And so I decided to venture in an untested territory for me because I was stepping out of historical research and going in a totally different area. But first I wanted to make sense, okay, looking at the research, what could explain this master narrative and this other dimension? The first level, I think that we have had a lot of interest in the relationship between donor behavior and public trust. That has been something that started in the 90s with widely publicized scandals surrounding non-profit organizations, United Way, the Nature Conservancy, and so on. So this relationship was something that started to be of interest for practitioners and scholars. Not surprisingly, some of the work I cite here is by Adrian Sargent, who looked at the relationship between public trust and between trust and donations. So from that perspective, it would make sense if you see philanthropy as an economic exchange, that there is a direct impact of trust, concern, or loss of confidence, and the decline of donations. Where I was coming from was more from disaster literature, social capital literature, and conflict theory. Disaster literature points to, Quarantella in this case, points to two types of disaster: consensus disaster, a consensus type disaster, and a conflict type disaster. The consensus type is often a natural disaster in which the community after disaster comes together to move on. The conflict type disaster is often a human-made disaster. Often it refers to riots more than disasters. And it points to the fact that certain components within the community might have an interest in maintaining a high level of conflict. 9/11 and terrorist attacks in general could be seen as a combination of both, I think. Conflict theory, at a second level, really points us to the complex dynamics of in-group and out-of-groups, and what it means to have out-of-groups blame and pressure, and how a certain groups and community might react to those pressures. The blame dimension. And lastly, social capital and group solidarity. Putnam talks about bridging social capital, bonding social capital. And here we have that in-group solidarity, but then also the component of crossing the groups. So coming from this type of literature, I was expecting not a decline of donations, but something else that was more in line with an increase of engagement and participation. And I think also my training as a historian came in here by seeing philanthropy not exclusively as an economic exchange, but also as an expression of identity and values. In a certain way, we talk about the politics of benevolence. That is also the political side, it's how you express your identity and your values. So what I wanted to do is to see if those investigations had an impact on Muslim American philanthropy, and the chilling effect is a citation of Sharik's paper. So I used a very simple technique, a paired t-test. The goal was to match organizations, religious organizations, according to the classification of the NTTE codes, before and after a certain event, in this case 9/11. I matched organizations based on the financial data across the spectrum from Islamic, Christian, Protestant, and so on. I chose 2 points in time, 1999 and 2003, and limited to the case of New York. The decision to limit it geographically was driven by the fact that I thought, let's keep potential an extreme case and see what happens. The terrorist attack hit psychologically as well as physically the city of New York, so I was expecting an extreme reaction or effect in this case. 1999 and 2003 are the years in which there is the highest number of Islamic organizations listed in those categories, and 2003 is a good point in time because December 2001, Holy Land Foundation was indicted. In the following year is followed by several other indictments. So this kind of attention was particularly high. I can skip this. So this is just a descriptive table, and it shows some of the challenges and problems. Sharik in his paper mentioned how it's hard to dismiss a master narrative when there is problems, when you have a lack of data or evidence. The big problem here is that ideally the mean and median across the different organizations should be very similar. They are not in many cases, and the reason is it was very hard to match the organizations. The other big and major challenge was, and it is pointed out in this table, that a lot of these organizations are used fundraising expenses as a control variable. Many of these organizations did not list any costs in fundraising, which is very common, as we kind of know that organizations like to hide those costs or not list them, but it's obviously, again, one of those challenges what I faced. So looking at the results, that came up, and unfortunately nothing is significantly statistically significant. But it seems to suggest that rather than a decline of donations to Muslim American charities, there was an increase. It is not statistically significant, but I think the takeaway for me was that this is another stone or another argument that helps us to dismiss that master narrative. Just a couple of observations that potentially could also help to explain this. On the one hand, the choice of New York and limiting to New York would have had the opposite impact I expected. It might be that there the pressure against the discriminations against Muslim Americans was higher, so that in-group dynamics were stronger than in other places in the country. The other aspect is I focused on Muslim American Islamic organizations without distinguishing between international and national philanthropy. So that could have had also an impact. That if there is a shift from international philanthropy to national, that can explain these changes. And I think, in general speaking, that even if not statistically significant, it helps us to get a better idea of what happened after 9/11 and dismiss this myth of decline of donations to Muslim Americans. So in a certain way, it's the preface to your to your study. Thank you.